Hello, bonjour. I'm Andrew Mosker, President and CEO of National Music Centre, and this is the NMC Amplifier podcast.
We brought the music industry to a place where Black professionals would be. And oftentimes they don't cross paths because there's so many Black professionals who are adjacent or want to get into the music industry, but don't know who to talk to and how to talk to them. So if we don't create that space, it never happens.
Okay, welcome to the Amplifier broadcast here at the National Music Centre. I'm Andrew Mosker, the host. Our guest today is an incredibly inspiring person, Keziah Myers, who's the Executive Director of Advance, which is the Black Music Coalition, Music Business Collective of Canada. And it's an exciting organization that's been around for a few years, but it's been in the works for many, many years. And it's an exciting and inspirational, I would say, movement and organization. And so, Keziah, welcome to the NMC Amplifier podcast. It's so great that you were able to come out from Toronto to Calgary to be here with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited.
And why don't we just kick things off with telling us an overview about what Advance is and what it does.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, first and foremost. And it is a pleasure to be here. Happy to be in Calgary for tomorrow's festivities, the induction at the Music Hall of Fame. So that's going to be awesome. Advance is an organization that focuses on empowering, educating, and elevating Black music business professionals. Advance, Canada's Black Music Business Collective, is really looking at advocacy and how we work with organizations on breaking down racial and systemic barriers. We talk about mentorship. We look at that from fostering and connecting the dots. We also talk about programming and how we're educating and training people, and community outreach, how we're getting everybody involved. And so that's Advance in a nutshell. We've been around since 2020, and we're going to be here for a lot longer.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into more details about all the amazing things Advance is doing. I'm really interested in the mentorship aspect of that because that's part of it. So what kind of things does Advance do now to try to help mentor Black professionals in the music business as part of this collective? What are some of the types of programs that you're advancing?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. Mentorship is key to success in the music industry. It's probably key to success in many industries, to be honest. And mentorship and sponsorship are critical to the advancement of one who is trying to progress and be upwardly mobile in the music industry. And so when we talk about mentorship, what we do is we are constantly mentoring by being on platforms, by providing education and training, by being open to having conversations. There are a number of us who've been in the industry. I mentioned I was in the industry for 17 years. But if you look at someone like Big C, he's been in the industry for 35. And there's this wide range of knowledge, but connecting the dots sometimes just doesn't happen. And so Advance actually sits in this space where mentorship, the way we facilitate mentorship is by allowing people to connect the dots. And so it's connecting dots with other Black music business professionals, but it's also connecting the dots with people who are in your field who are doing inspiring, inspirational things. So they don't have to be Black. My mentors coming up, because there was 2 Black women on either side of the country, for the most part weren't Black music business professionals that I was mentored by. But it was because I was connected by someone else connecting the dot for me that I was able to have conversations with women. And in my case, it was women who were mothers, because I was a mother, that I was able to look up to and be mentored by. So Advance puts programming together around education, training, pipeline development, exposure. So we are in the process of, for the second time, we have taken Black students to a concert. They've never been to a concert before, which is mind-blowing because they're in grade 11 and 12. So we're talking about 16 and 17-year-olds But catch this, their parents in many cases haven't been to a concert before. And when I'm talking about a concert, I'm not talking about the park concert. I'm talking about a concert at a arena or a venue or a theater. And so in that program, it's called Inside Live, and we do that with Live Nation MLSE, which is Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, and Art House. And the mentorship piece that's there is those of us who are in the industry come, we teach, we act as facilitators, and then we have 3 days with these students and parents. So it is a partnership program for the parent and the student, primarily because we recognize that the student needs the mentorship, not only from me, but needs the mentorship from their parent. But it also means they need the support from their parent. And in the Black community, many parents don't understand that you can sit here in roles like you and I, being paid a salary, supporting our families, and
working in the sector.
Exactly. And sustainable.
So that we don't perpetuate what a lot of parents do. You don't want to be an artist.
Exactly.
You don't want to work in, there's no jobs in that business.
Right, exactly.
And that's
still the narrative that is sent along within these communities because they don't know.
Yeah, they just don't know.
They don't know what they don't know. So when they are exposed to that, and what we do in Inside Live is day one, parent and student go through a training of what behind the scenes roles there are for you in a live venue or at a concert space. That's from live engineering to stage management to food and beverage and to the marketing manager. And so we take them through that process. Day two, they do a site visit at the actual venue of the concert, followed by actually attending the concert. So mentorship to me also includes shared experiences. And mentorship is community to me. So we're providing these opportunities for a student to be able to have a conversation with me that maybe is 15 minutes, but it's off the cuff, it's off the record, ask any questions you'd want. But then you go back on that drive after watching a concert with your parent who also hasn't been to a concert before, and now you're being mentored by your parent.
Yeah.
And now we're being sponsored and supported by our parent. And so that's what mentorship looks like at Advance, connecting the dots and fostering those opportunities.
That's amazing. I mean, I noticed that you had a panel at the Junos this year, right?
I did.
So, which was fantastic.
Thank you.
And mentorship could come in the form of just someone being present at a panel.
Right.
Right. But not really knowing that these opportunities exist. And how was the experience of having that panel at the Junos this year? Was that the first time you've actually been at the Junos? Because there wasn't really a Junos last year in Edmonton. There kind of was, in Toronto. There was a mini Juno was in Toronto. And then before that, it was canceled.
Right.
And then
we all remember that.
we all remember that.
It was not my first time at the Junos, but it was. So in Toronto, although it was scaled back, that was the first presence of Advance at the Junos. So Advance didn't exist before. And so 2021 Junos in Toronto was massive for Advance. At that year, we did 4 activations. One was a Black, what was it? It was called the Black Music Brunch. And the Black Music Brunch was celebrating the rap nominees specifically over the last 50 years. So anybody who is a nominee or a manager connected to a nominee was at this event. So that in itself was mentorship. You're now bringing generations together, and people are able to look up. Because to me, mentorship also is different for different people. The way I mentored is not by sitting in a chair or across from someone and being mentored every month or every week. For me, mentorship oftentimes comes from me observing other people and watching them track their path, and then me following closely behind them and just watching how they navigate. Mentorship can also come from a panel. So in 2021, we had the Black Music Brunch, which celebrated the rap nominees. We had Advance House, which was the first time we did Advance House. It was sold out at a venue called Love Child in Toronto. And it was another way of the way that we facilitated mentorship. We brought the music industry to a place where Black professionals would be. And oftentimes they don't cross paths because there's so many Black professionals who are adjacent or want to get into the music industry, but don't know who to talk to and how to talk to them. So if we don't create that space, it never happens. The big mentorship piece for us that year was, and we did it again in the Junos this year, was we brought 50 Black students to the dress rehearsal.
Amazing, yeah.
And we've done that now for 2 years in a row. We did it in Toronto. We did it in Edmonton. And in Edmonton, it was actually 35 Black and 15 Indigenous. And bring them to the dress rehearsal so they can see not only up close and personal, like you know how it is at the dress rehearsal, you are at the stage. And you are seeing all of these shows, all of these performances happen in real time. And you couldn't be closer to whether it be Simu or whether it be Jessie Reyes, or whether it be, and then on top of that, we're taking them knowing it's dress rehearsal. So they're looking around and they're seeing someone who's doing the filming. They're seeing someone who's doing stage management. They're seeing a group of us at the back, especially this year with the 50th anniversary of hip hop, being like, is this going to go well? Is this going to go well at the computer?
They're seeing the actual business in action.
They're seeing the business of it.
In action.
Exactly. And so that's, so this year at the Junos, we did that again and we did the Be the Change. So this is the first time we've had a profile on Advance at the Junos.
Oh, it's amazing. Really amazing. The second part of Advance is sort of that sort of trio of priorities that you have in advocacy. So that is when I was reading about it again today, just that following up on accountability, which I thought was very appropriate and very interesting at the same time,
Yes.
And exciting too. Like, it's just, I always look at those things as I never, myself personally, as a music person, and because of where I was raised, in Montreal, around a very diverse community where there was battles over languages, particularly when I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I mean, I lived through 2 referendums, and there was, diversity was already kind of a given where I grew up, but I know it's not that way for a lot of people. And so how to advance advocacy, keeping organizations and individuals accountable, having commit to plans, and then following up and supporting at the same time. Those are all important actions. And I know here at National Music Center, we're very committed to action. And, I'm proud that we've demonstrated that with the Indigenous community, with the Indigenous Programming Advisory Committee that's been part of NMC for almost 4 years now. It's funded, it's given space, a seat at the leadership table, decision-making, and curatorial expertise, where we at NMC management is completely hands-off. We're just here to help. Here's the space. What do you need? Okay, this is the space, lights, heating, this is how it works.
Operations, logistics.
Operational logistics.
Yeah.
How can we help? How can we help and support? So on the advocacy, so what are Advance's primary, goals, and what does it want to achieve through advocacy? I've only shared what I've learned from reading about it on the website, but can you share with us and our audience a little bit more about that?
Absolutely.
About the advocacy piece.
Advocacy for Advance is eliminating systemic barriers and addressing systemic racism that exists within our structures. And there's lots of opportunity to do that because many of our policies, whether it's in government, whether it's in applications, they have been written with a bias with an unconscious bias. And that unconscious bias oftentimes is hurting another group that's not taken into consideration. That could mean not having an application in multiple languages, right? As we talk about language. So advocacy for Advance is looking at all of the areas that we touch and the opportunities we have to create change in real time. And one of those, as an example, is the passing of Bill C-11. So Bill C-11 is the Online Streaming Act. And Advance was born at the time that Bill C-10 was in conversation, which was reviewing the Broadcast Act. that Broadcast Act hadn't been reviewed for 25 years. And now is an opportune time to be able to speak to what may have been written back then and who it helped to elevate and who it didn't help to elevate. And sometimes we have to look at those documents and recognize that the word diversity or cultural diversity is not actually mentioned in an act. And therefore, when people are programming radio, if we're looking at CRTC and CanCon, it's benefiting one group of people, not thinking about the others because of that unconscious bias or because of that systemic racism or because of those systemic barriers, and not creating an opportunity like equity. So when we looked at Bill C-10, Advance wrote a letter along with a number of other organizations in the community to talk about where we would like to see some changes. And this is recommendations that we provided to the CRTC. A number of them were adopted, and the look at cultural diversity is now taken into consideration. Thank you. With Bill C-11, we had to step up our game. We got recommendations in. Now let's talk about legislation. And so Bill C-11, Online Streaming Act, I started a conversation with the Racial Equity Media Collective. And the conversation I had with them as they were having a conversation about ensuring that diversity was instilled into that legislation was breaking out Black as a cultural group. Reason being is because Black as a cultural group has had a very different experience than some of our other racialized peoples who have come as immigrants to Canada. There are communities in Canada that are 400 years old of Black people who came into Canada as enslaved people. And so that positioning and the way in which those Black people came to Canada changes their experience altogether, right? And it creates this embedding of they're less than in many scenarios. Not much different than the US, although Canada sometimes thinks that we are much better. There's one that's overt and there's one that's a little bit more subliminal, but it's still there. If you look in your grade 10 history book, Black is mentioned 1 or 2 times out of an entire book. And so I said to the Racial Media Equity Collective, I'd like it actually to say Indigenous, Black, and racialized peoples. And I did that along with lobbying and petitioning to my coworkers and colleagues across the industry. Most of them added it to their witness testimonies for the bill, and it was approved. It went through in legislation. And for the first time in the history of this country, Black as a cultural group is mentioned in legislation.
Congratulations. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting difference, the way you've explained it about the experience of 400 years in terms of when Black people first came to this country. It wasn't a country back then. It was just a place that
forcibly came to this country.
Forcibly came to this country,
Yeah.
right, as slaves.
Yeah.
Versus somebody that immigrated here a year ago.
Right.
It's a very different experience. But actually isolating the word Black, versus just embedding it in cultural
racialized
diversity.
People, yeah.
Racialized
and so
people.
that was what
That's
it was.
an important distinction.
Broke it out to make that distinction. And we see that across the board. The experience is so different and people are treated so differently that breaking out the word is for the sake of equity. And it also holds us all accountable so we can go to legislation and have a conversation about how culturally diverse are we being? Are we recognizing that there is a group that has come here against their will and now has to work in the space beside people who brought them here against their will?
Yeah.
Right?
How was it received?
Oh my goodness, everybody loved it. I mean, I have not, from an advocacy perspective, had anybody stand against what Advance is doing. And I think it's because Advance came at this opportune time and everybody's on board, right? We all recognize, I mean, thanks to the murder of George Floyd as being a martyr in that particular scenario, or an example that we can draw to. It was a visual, it was right, exactly, to us recognizing that there truly is an issue here. Not to mention, I've got to think in this scenario, COVID. And only because we were zoned in, nobody had anything else to do. We were on our phones. We recognized that this was a problem. This is not the first time that a Black man has been murdered by a police officer, but this is a time where the world had to stop because we were forcibly stopped.
It was something I certainly experienced. I mean, where I grew up, there was always a lot of tension between the police in Montreal and the Black community, constantly. In fact, I forget his last name. His first name was Anthony. He was murdered by the Montreal police in the late 80s, and he was from the Black community. And there was always a lot of tension between, at least when I was growing up, between those like the police and the Black community in Montreal. And when George Floyd died or was murdered, like you, there's part of me that was like going, I'm amazed that people are actually finally noticing this, because it almost happens too often. And people go on about their business.
It's still happening.
It's still happening.
It's still happening. Yeah.
As someone who is, spent their life studying history, any kind of history, mostly music history, but any kind of history, which invariably, when you're involved in music history and you work in a place that amplifies and celebrates and tries to preserve history, you have to confront where that music came from. You have to confront it. Music is created as a response often to a given environment and situation. And often music, like when I think about someone like Sam Cooke, right? American artists in particular, at a time in the 40s and 50s, and many of us in Canada were inspired by American artists because that's all we were hearing before CanCon, right? And before there was a Canadian music industry. We heard those stories, a change is going to come, right? And we listened to those lyrics, right? And because we were inundated with American media and film and television, we saw those stories and we learned about them in Canada. So when everyone was up in arms about George Floyd, part of me was like, where have you been, folks?
Yeah.
Where have you been?
This is happening.
Like, wake up. Like, where have you been?
Well, I mean, if you look at hip hop, and this year being the 50th anniversary of hip hop, it was said that rap was not going to survive. Like when rap was first created as a response to political change, as a new technology, the music industry thought, give it a year and it will be done. Right. And here we are 50 years later. Right. It's not, and we talk about pop music and back in the day, urban, which was just a way of segregating Black from the popular music at the time. But hip hop is pop. Rap is pop.
It is. Yeah, it is.
It is so infiltrated. I mean, when I hear songs and I'm listening to Selena Gomez on an Afrobeats track, I'm like, whoa, mind blown. Never thought.
Hip hop kind of helped a lot of people's voices become a bit more democratized because of the musical form itself, allowed it to be produced it is as complex as any piece of music. Especially when you get into looking at beats and different parts of the musical aesthetic itself.
Flow, aesthetic.
But when you hear the stories that come out of hip hop, and you learn about the communities that they come from, you realize there is a racialized story within those communities. And it's going back as the 1970s. I mean, Gil Scott-Heron was arguably like one of the first rappers, right? And the revolution will not be televised, right? And there's a reason why that was, because there was somebody in control of television, right? So how did the message need to get out? And music was the vehicle, became one of the many vehicles. So here today, the work that Advance is doing on advocacy, I'm delighted that it was met with like no resistance.
No resistance.
And just acceptance.
Yes, acceptance and open arms in how can we help. At this time, I'm so proud to say that Advance has worked with over 40 organizations and corporations across the music industry in an advocacy capacity. And, we were working in some cases with super groups and steering committees to put grant applications together. And in those moments, I come to the table as someone just with a different lens. And so when we're talking about marketing budgets for some of these grant applications, the voice that I have at the table allows me to say, have we considered the fact that there needs to be a larger marketing budget for this particular group or these particular groups to ensure that they're hearing the message that you want them to hear? And as an example, live example is Unison. The Unison Foundation received a grant which was to help support those who had lost funds through COVID, those who were really still struggling. And you could apply to Unison. But if we think about who knows about Unison, it's not a very diverse group of people who know about Unison as an organization. And so in that moment, it was advanced representation that said, why don't we have a dedicated marketing budget for the South Asian community, for the Indigenous community, for the Black community, and we let them know preemptively that this grant is coming, because we need a little bit of a head start. Otherwise, those funds could potentially disappear and have a whole community not know that there was access there. So we have to create those pathways. So that's what advocacy really looks like, is if I see a gap and I can speak to it, then we move forward in how to solve it, how to address it, what to do to create more access and resources and equity.
One more question I have about the momentum around the acceptance, right? So we had that period of time where everyone got focused, George Floyd, where have you been? Wake up. Fantastic. Let's see Sam Cooke, a change is going to come, according to long time ago,
Yeah.
And yes, there has been incremental change in some places, but certainly not enough. And so we see this catalyst moment, right? And so COVID is arguably over. I'm not anyone can declare that. I think the WHO declared it. So it's arguably over. We're moving on. There was a full Junos Award this year in Edmonton. And has the momentum around the advocacy movement around Advance been maintained? Or have you noticed that are people getting back to their old ways? Or, I don't mean it from a racist perspective or racialized perspective in terms of falling back into their old habits or views, but are people still focused on the advocacy and still want to help in the same way they were prior to COVID or during COVID?
I think so. I think now I'm helping the community move out into action from education. And so originally it was education. Oh, I didn't realize this was happening. I didn't realize I was doing this. I didn't realize that me hiring a friend that looked just like me and then the office all just looks like me, I wasn't taking into consideration that we should have some diversity there and that would benefit your business, actually. So now we're moving into this area of action where so many companies have made it a foundational change. They've looked at their policies, they've looked at their hiring practices, they've looked at their jury selection, and they recognize that there needs to be cultural diversity within it. I think that there's a place for Advance always, because we are the industry's accountability partner, so to speak. We are here to support. We are here to work with. We are also here to ask questions if we do see some of the just being complacent, going back into like, oh, this is comfortable for me, because people like being comfortable. Uncomfortable is not good, but in order for us to move forward, we need to be uncomfortable. And so I would say that I'm noticing, because there's more diversity in a lot of these spaces, those people are in decision-making positions, and they help to keep a foot on the pedal. And then Advance continues to work in spaces and everybody sees the need for cultural diversity. And I think, driving, panels like Be the Change, where I drive home the impact of Black music and us actually being able to tie Canadian musicians to that story of Black music helps people realize, yeah, a lot of money comes in this country by way of Drake and The Weeknd.
Hello. Totally.
So
and everyone brags about it.
And everybody brags
everyone
about
brags
it.
about it.
How many Drakes and The Weeknds have we missed out on? How many Deborah Coxes have we missed out on? How many Salome Bays have we missed out on because the people in decision-making positions weren't representative of the culture? And so I think the wider music industry recognizes that and wants to see a flourishing music industry. Therefore, they're going to want to see diversity at their table.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy the show, please take a moment to give us the highest rating you can on your podcast app. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. National Music Center is a registered charity with a mission to amplify the love, sharing, and understanding of music, and we rely on donor support to achieve this mission. If you like this show or anything else that National Music Center is doing, please consider leaving a donation by following the link in the description. I just wanted to go back to mentorship for a second because at the Junos in Toronto last year, Denise Jones was recognized. And I had not had any encounters in my career with Denise because I didn't really work in the Toronto music sector. And what I learned from Dalton and to a certain degree, Vivian, because we're all in the Canadian Music Hall of Fame selection committee together. So I'm a member of that committee. So when we go through long lists and short lists and have conversations, I always, I learned a lot from Dalton and about there isn't a person, including me, he would say, that wasn't mentored in some way, shape, or form by Denise Jones. You may not know that, but the reason I'm sitting here, this is Dalton speaking right now,
yes,
around this committee table, is because of Denise Jones. And what I found about the education and the momentum, just to touch on your last 2 points, the mentorship piece and then the momentum, there was, I think, a lot of excitement and acceptance as people learned more about Denise and her role in music, in not only in Toronto, but internationally, right?
Yeah,
because a lot of people understood, well, she was just a Toronto promoter. No. There was way more to it than that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so just listening to those stories for me as someone who's in the music history sector, I learned so much about someone I didn't know a lot about. And just to see the outpouring that night on the Saturday at the gala was really special, with their kids, with their sons get up and accept the award on her behalf. And that kind of story, I think, just to touch on your points about mentorship can happen in a lot of different forms. And Denise was a good example of that. It may have been something small in some case, but it may opened a door for somebody and then opened another door for somebody. And secondly, the point about Denise Jones in general, just being in the Canadian Music Hall of Fame as the music industry professional for that year, that story here at the NMC, not yet, but in time, is a story we would like to somehow continue to disseminate. And to your point earlier, there's some of the work that maybe we could do together on the programming side, broadly speaking, programming. This is a story about someone who built something over many years, and you could do this too and derive inspiration from it. That is a very exciting opportunity about the future, right? So in terms of advance and sort of like what I want to kind of lead the conversation next is where do you see advance in the next year or two in terms of you have a strategic plan on your website? And where do you see, I'd like to hear more about it from you specifically, advance some of its goals and objectives and what it would like to accomplish in the next, 1 to 3 years, knowing now that we don't have to worry too much about a pandemic, forcing us to pivot into some other way quickly. You got a little bit of runway now. So where do you see it going?
So there's so many spaces where I see advance going. I love to dream. I'm a dreamer.
You should do that. It's good. I don't mean to should you, but leaders need to dream.
You need to dream.
And you're a leader. You need to dream.
I love to dream. The sky is not the limit. The moon and the stars and the galaxy are. And so when I'm dreaming, I'm thinking about Advance, and I'm taking those real life dreams and putting strategy behind them. And so that's actually how we've gotten to where we are today. We are now reaching 5,000 people over a year. We have placed 151 Black professionals into positions within the music industry, both short-term, long-term internship, and we continue to do that. And we have reached coast to coast. Where Advance is going is definitely to continue to reach coast to coast. Nationally, you got it. A national organization. So we need to truly be a national organization. That is something so important to me.
We have a little bit. We have some experience.
Yeah.
Both the good and the not so good.
Yeah, exactly.
And the challenges.
There's
challenging.
Very
challenging. Yeah.
It's challenging, and you have to hold yourself accountable. I'm from the city of Toronto, and in Toronto, all of your headquarters are in Toronto. So it's very easy to get sucked into this music industry in Toronto. And that's just me personally. But when I'm leading an organization that's focused on the development and empowerment and education for the Black music business professional as a whole, I need to recognize that that person can come from none of it, that person can come from PEI, and that person can come from Alberta. And I want to be able to service them not the same, but intentionally focused on the needs that that community may have. And so when I think about forward thinking in Advance, it's continuing to do just that. It's tapping into the provinces and understanding the needs that are there to help build the ecosystem. One of the big goals for Advance is to see ecosystems thrive in provinces outside of Ontario. So the Black ecosystem or the Black music business professional in the music ecosystem in BC should not feel that they need to come to Toronto. They should be able to do a good amount of work until they have to come to Toronto or have to go abroad. The reason for that also is capacity. Not at the Black community as a whole is not always in a position where they can just fund these tours back and forth and move to Toronto. It's not realistic. And so a lot of we talked about before about the next weekend, that person may be living in Kelowna, BC with lack of access to Toronto. How do we ensure that we find that person? So that's one of the major goals, is to continue to focus on programming that is catered to the provinces and the experiences that each Black professional has across the country. Other goals, we want to continue to see Black people promoted and in upwardly mobile position, or moving upward mobility in the music industry and moving up through promotions into decision-making positions. And right now we are working with Women in Music on a senior leadership development program that is looking at how we can take those who are doing incredible work, those who are excellent at what they do, and taking them to the next level, giving them the skills to be able to move forward in their career. We want to do a lot more of that, and that's a big goal because that goal helps with pipeline. We talked about earlier about the high school student that's never been at a concert before. Well, if we're going to really focus on pipeline, we want it to see A to Z. And we want to get to a position where you are the Vivian Barkley, who's the managing director of Warner Chappell Music, right? It's a big job, and we need more representation in those spaces. So that is another goal. The third goal is to continue to work with the music industry at large and continue to be in spaces that we're not in yet. Continue to focus on whether it be advocacy or whether it be representation, building our ongoing relationship with the community, but also helping the community connect with the industry. And so if we connect with the industry, the question is, what can the industry do? Well, the goal is for the industry and Advance to just continue to work simultaneously, collaboratively, so that we look back in 5 years from now and we see a totally different makeup of the music industry, which ultimately benefits the music industry and the Canadian profile overall.
Well, it's you have such an inspiring vision. You are a very, very passionate person. You can just feel it, and you just you're a tour de force. You've got a lot of, I think, energy behind your convictions, and you're actually making things happen.
It's all about the action.
It's all about the
It is
action.
all about the action.
We were chatting earlier just in our warm up,
Mm-hmm.
pre-recording, about reconciliation, which, certainly I've learned, working with the indigenous communities across this country and putting ideas into action, so that there really is more. It's more than just words, and because we all do land acknowledgements, across this country. But one of the things I've certainly learned is follow up that land acknowledgement with what you're doing about it and tell a story about it. And if you can really find the energy to put things into action like you've done, you've just described it so eloquently, then there will be some real change, and there won't be any more of those George Floyd wake up moments. Those are moments in time that we still have to always acknowledge that are there. Sadly, they won't go away overnight. However, I think the work that you're doing with Advance and your team and your board of directors and all the various activities that you've taken upon, the advocacy, the programming, the building community, the focus on the music business specifically, which is very clear, are producing results even in a short time, Keziah, and I think it's inspiring to watch it happen, just unfold. And not just for me as someone that works in this sector, but I think also for, I think honoring the artists in particular, the creators have done so much for the Canadian music industry to begin with. I was fortunate enough to be inspired by jazz musicians where I grew up, and hip hop in the 80s and dance music. And I was lucky to, see Oscar Peterson play and Oliver Jones play, be introduced to him in the 80s, and really see the magic of this work, this creative work, and how it can inspire people around the world. And I think it's our jobs to try to elevate the next generation and bring those voices into the mainstream, or so that they're not considered, on the fringes. They're part of the mainstream. And I just applaud everything that Advance is doing, and we here at NMC would love to support in any way the work that Advance is doing in and by taking action. So that's maybe we can save that for another podcast.
Yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah.
No, I think you really hit on some key points, and the support and the elevation, the momentum is key. We need each other for us to be successful. And I talked about Canada being on a stage for the music industry, an opportunity to be able to just permeate the global industry. And that also requires us to support our entrepreneurs. You talked about on the fringes. When you say on the fringes, I sometimes think about the Black entrepreneurs who don't have that support. They don't have the monetary support. They don't have the familiar support. And it's the music industry that should, and Advance, who should be working to ensure that they are supported so they can support the artists that we also have coming out of this country.
I would have loved, he couldn't come tomorrow, but the current chancellor of the University of Calgary is John Cornish. John Cornish, not a musician, but he was the first Black chancellor of the University of Calgary. Hall of Fame CFL football player who played for the Calgary Stampede. He was like a wide receiver. And he was elected to become the first Black chancellor of the University of Calgary very recently. And in his day job, he works in the financial services sector, and he founded the Black Chamber in Calgary.
Okay.
So helping young Black entrepreneurs here in the city of Calgary with the work that they're doing. And so he's a really inspiring guy. He was excited about coming tomorrow, but unfortunately wasn't available. I wanted to introduce you to him because he's, part of our world here in terms of where the National Music Center lives here in Calgary. So, but for another time.
Yeah, I'd love.
For another time. I think
it's great work that he's doing, though. Understanding that the ecosystem and the social enterprise and the need for support through entrepreneurship or in entrepreneurship is a big one.
Just lastly, so two quick questions. how did you feel? I mean, I was certainly inspired by, because I was very inspired by 80s hip hop and
Okay.
90s hip hop growing up. So
Okay.
forget my work at the National Music Center. It's more of me as a music fan.
Yes, fair.
At the Junos this year with
Okay.
the 50th anniversary of Canadian hip hop,
Yeah.
and that big showcase on the broadcast.
Yes.
That was my first question. And then lastly, here we are, you're here in Calgary for the Canadian Music Hall of Fame induction ceremony, which has only happened once before in 2019. And two artists from the Black community, Oliver Jones and Deborah Cox, are going to be on stage tomorrow night here at the National Music Center. How does that make you feel, just in light of all the work that you're doing with Advance?
So I'll start with question number one. How did I feel about the 50th anniversary of hip hop presentation at the Junos? I was so proud. It was a proud mama moment for me. The story behind that is Alan and I had a conversation about the 50th anniversary, and it was a very quick turnaround in terms of making sure that there was a good representation, a proud moment on stage, and bringing that all together. So outside of proud, I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness we're done.
Yeah, I know. It's event stress.
It was event stress. It was event
it's normal.
stress. It's
event
normal
stress
event
is normal.
stress.
It's just normal.
But I was so happy to see the reception of everybody else. Also, a lot of people don't know how much work goes into getting these 4 acts on stage at the same time. So I was really happy that we were able to get everybody we wanted on stage. I was really happy with the work that Havaya and Cardi did to tee everything up. Really happy of how the community came out. People don't realize this, but the entire hip hop rap community was involved because there were pictures on the back of the screens or on the screens behind the performances. Those were all brought to you by anybody and everybody we could find and touch who had a picture from back in the day, from current, and so
pre-iPhone,
right? Exactly, yeah. And then also had to clear all of them. So that was fun. And then I was really happy to see Rich Kid in that moment. It's just such a big moment for someone who has not been in a space like this before. And as a producer, he lives for the students that he continues to inspire through the Remix project. So seeing him stitch that all together was really awesome. So I was really proud of the moment. Proud mama, brought everybody together and worked with the rap committee and Karis and Insight to put on a memorable 10 minutes and 16 seconds.
It was incredible, yeah. It was incredible. I was cheering you on with my cast on.
I remember.
On the sidelines, but I was there with my cast on and my crutches. Great. It was fantastic. So
that was good. And then your second question, Oliver Jones and Deborah Cox. Fun fact, my uncle was Deborah Cox's vocal coach.
What?
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I grew up, when I was 5 years old, I would go to my grandma's house regularly, who grew up in Toronto, Forest Hill. This is where my parents grew up. And my uncle would teach music from there in my grandma's piano room with a gorgeous grand piano. And I had the pleasure of seeing many artists that you would see today go through that living room or through that piano room, one of which was Deborah Cox. And so
wow.
At 5 years old, I was watching him do exercises with Deborah Cox, and she will tell you to this day, she still does those exercises given to her by my uncle.
Wow, like vocal exercises,
so
breathing
this is
exercises.
Like full circle moment. So incredible to see this. And then Oliver Jones, as a pianist myself, I am so enthralled by jazz. I mean, also because I can't really do it. I'm a classically trained musician. And so the closest I get to jazz is like a raised 9th or a 13th. And then that's it, because my dad, envy definitely on my dad's part, sits at the piano and just does.
Just plays it. Sits down, does it.
Just does it.
Yeah.
Never had a piano lesson in his life. It's annoying. But Oliver Jones being inducted is going to be phenomenal. To me, what that says is that, you asked that question about, what the industry, how the industry is feeling and the support there. This is an example of that support, right? That we're moving in spaces. We're recognizing that there haven't been people at the table. We're recognizing that our Hall of Fames maybe aren't as diverse as they should be, or not maybe they aren't as diverse as they should be when we look at cultural diversity, and the steps that are being taken by Keras, by National Music Center to push that forward and continue to be those voices and speak when people like myself cannot be in the room is this is an example of that.
Oh, fantastic. So well said. Keziah Myers, it's been a real honor to have you here today. I mean, you're articulate, you're passionate, you're clear about where you're going, you've got a plan, you're committed. Advance is lucky to have you as the leader at the helm. It's a real honor and privilege for me to be here with you, to hear you tell your story and the story of Advance. And National Music Center is excited to continue to, learn from the Black community and to support it. And we're here to hopefully develop some work together and possibly some collaboration. So
I'm excited
we will have
for that.
some follow-up meetings after this podcast.
We sure will.
And maybe there's a part 2 of this podcast coming, hopefully, and to talk about some of the work that we might do together in the future.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the National Music Center's podcast, NMC Amplifier, with me, Andrew Mosker. We have lots of other great content online for free, including live performances, videos, articles, podcasts, interviews with artists, and more. Head over to amplify.nmc.ca and check it out. National Music Center is a registered charity with a mission to amplify the love, sharing, and understanding of music, and we rely on donor support to achieve this mission. If you like the show or anything else NMC is doing, please consider leaving us a donation. NMC Amplifier is recorded on Treaty 7 in Mohkinstsis, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, at Studio Bell, home of the National Music Center. To learn more about National Music Center, go to studiobell.ca. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, au revoir.